The morning light spills across my window in a long golden ribbon, running soft over the table like a hand that's finally learned not to shake. And for the first time in a long while, I breathe without the echo of my own mistakes, chasing the breath away. I sit with a cup of coffee, cooling slow between my palms, watching steam climb upward like it's trying to carry all my burdens with it. And the quiet here feels different, less like punishment, more like mercy. Like a soft blanket, the daylight pulls over the trembling parts of me. The city outside whispers through the glass in muffled tones, cars humming low like distant memories rolling down a gentle hill. And I feel the last remains of last night's shadows slipping from my shoulders, falling silent to the floor where they can't climb back up again. Morning light on the edge of my silence, pain and forgiveness on the corners of my tired heart, lifting the dust from the places I hid my fears, turning the broken lines of my past into something warm and worthwhile. Yeah, this sunrise feels like a slow blues redemption, letting me know I made it through the night. I lean my head back slowly and close my eyes to the quiet glow, letting the warmth settle deep where old regrets once lived like tenants. And I can almost hear the voice I used to have before the world wore it thin, steady, honest, unashamed to shake, but strong enough to speak again. My hands rest easy on the table now, not clenched like they used to be. And I think about every time I walked away from the dawn because it felt too bright. But today I let it touch me, let it write its soft truth on my skin. Because a man can only hide from himself for so many winters before he wants the sun. Maybe healing isn't loud or certain, maybe it's a quiet arrival, a flicker in the darkness, a whisper that says you're allowed to try again. A small light that doesn't conquer the night, but teaches you how to stop fearing it. The morning grows fuller now, lifting shadows from the walls one by one. And I swear the room feels larger, like my heart has made some space. And I take one slow sip of coffee, letting its warmth remind me that I'm still here, still trying, still learning how to stay. So I rise from the chair with a softness I haven't felt in years, letting the morning wrap itself around me like a promise gently given. And I whisper to the empty room, to the daylight, to myself, this is the start I've been waiting for. And I think I'm ready now, and I think I'm ready now. The river moves slow beneath the bridge this evening, carrying the weight of the city like it had practiced for a lifetime. And when I stepped on to
to the path beside it. The wind swept around me like it recognized an old companion, finally coming home. I walk with my hands deep in my coat, feeling the rhythm of the river match the rhythm of my stride. And each soft splash against the stone felt like a whispered reassurance, as if the water already knew the story of my bruised and wandering heart. Lights from the opposite bank shimmered across the surface, stretching long and trembling like memories I wasn't ready to throw away. And for once I didn't run from them or bury them, I just let them float there with the current, gentle as falling leaves. The river walked beside me like an old friend tonight, not asking for answers, not demanding I be whole, just rolling steady at my side with patience carved into every ripple, letting me know that healing doesn't rush, and sometimes the quiet flow of water is enough to carry a man forward. I pause beneath the overpass where shadows gather thick, listening to the city murmuring above me like a tired giant shifting in its sleep. And I felt my shoulders drop, my breath deepen, as if the river had reached into my chest and loosened every knot inside. I kept walking until the light stretched thin and distant, till only moonlight painted silver on the moving water. And in the darkness I found something I thought I lost long ago, the courage to tell myself that sorrow isn't a home, just a stop along the way. Maybe forgiveness isn't a door swinging open, but a long path beside a river that never stops flowing, teaching you in every quiet moment that nothing in this world stays broken forever. Not water, not stone, not even a heart. The wind grew warm as I turned back toward the city, carrying the scent of night blossoms and distant trains. And I slipped my hands from my pockets, feeling lighter, steadier, almost brand new, with the river still humming its blues beside me. When I finally reached the bridge again, the water below glimmered like a promise, softly spoken. And I whispered to the current, thank you for walking with me. You reminded me how to move again. The lamp in my window glowed amber when I finally came home, shining soft through the rain like a guardian that never lost faith. And the moment I saw his quiet light waiting for me, something inside my tired chest unclenched for the first time in months. I stepped through the doorway with clothes soaked and shoulders heavy. The storm outside still screaming down the street like it wanted to swallow the world. But that little lamp just hummed in warm silence, telling me without a single word that I was allowed to rest again. The room smelled of dust and the faint memory of mornings we once shared, like echoes still clinging to the corners where our laughter lived. And as I ran my hand along the wooden table we used to crowd with coffee mugs, I felt the weight of wandering years loosen from my palms and fall to the floor. That lamp in my window waited through the storms I ran into. Its glow a steady pulse calling me back from places I should have never gone, whispering light in the night when I forgot how to breathe, shining like a promise that my story wasn't done. Yeah, that small, unwavering flame held a piece of my hope long after I walked out with empty hands. I sat in my old armchair, the one where the fabric still remembers my shape, and watched raindrops race each other down the glass like they were carrying the leftovers of every regret I've been hoarding, washing them off the window pane, one tender streak at a time. My heart felt fragile in that moment, cracked but not collapsing, like an old guitar still capable of singing if someone dared touch the strings. And as the lamp flickered gently, like it was breathing with me, I realized I hadn't lost myself, just misplaced the quiet parts. Maybe the world doesn't break us on purpose, maybe it cracks us open so the light can come in. Maybe storms aren't enemies but weary teachers guiding us back toward the warmth we forgot belonged to us. The rain softened to a whisper, the room warmed around me, and I whispered thank you to that small lamp that guarded my home like a loyal friend through every cold season, promising with this quiet glow that I can start again, slowly, gently, truthfully. So I turned off the storm behind me and let the silence fill the room. letting the lamp guide my breathing back into something steady. And I lay my hand on the windowsill, whispering to the light, I'm back, and I think I'm finally ready to stay. The street glowed violet beneath the sinking sun. When I first noticed the shape of my shadow softening beside me, no longer stretched thin and haunted like a memory running scared, but walking slow and patient like an old friend, finally ready to talk. I moved down the cracked sidewalk with my hands in my pockets, listening to the hum of passing cars, blending with the heartbeat in my ears. And each breath felt like a confession I had carried too long, now rising into the open air without punishing me for its way. My shadow once clung to every mistake I made, echo in the nights I broke myself, trying to be everything I wasn't. But on this street, this familiar, forgiving street, it walked beside me with steadier edges. No blame, no rush, no shame. This is a street where my shadow learned to forgive me, where the lamplight stretched our silhouette into softer shapes, where the ghosts of who I used to be stopped clawing at my heel and simply follow like gentle echoes instead of accusation. Yeah, this quiet block held the mercy I never knew I needed, teaching me how to walk without flinching from myself. A breeze drifted through the branches above, carrying the smell of warm pavement and old summer evenings. And I swear I could hear my younger voice laughing somewhere far away, the version of me I lost track of when life grew heavier than my hands could hold. I slowed down as I approached the corner, letting the glow of a single street lamp settle over me like a blessing. And my shadow softened even more, its edges no longer jagged, as if it too had grown tired of being angry all these years. Maybe forgiveness doesn't come from someone else first. Maybe it blooms quietly when you stop running from your own reflection
When you let your past walk beside you without letting it steer. When you realize your shadow isn't proof of failure, but proof you kept moving, even when the light was behind you. So I stood beneath that street lamp, breathing slow, letting the dust cold both the man I've grown into and the boy who once didn't know how to survive his own storms. And for the first time they felt like the same person, not rivals, not strangers, but one whole healing soul. I walked home with my shadow at my side, not chasing, not accusing, just walking. And I whispered into the tender evening air, this is who we are now. And this I know.
The hallway felt longer tonight, stretching out like a memory. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to walk through, and the door at its end looked just the way I left it, slightly open, holding the shadows of a life I kept postponing. I stepped closer with slow, steady breaths, like a man approaching the version of himself he no longer carries. And the air around that doorway was thick with everything I once thought I couldn't live without. Names, fears, promises, ghosts with familiar eyes. My fingertips hovered above the wood, tracing lines worn from the nights I slammed it in anger. The mornings I leaned on it in exhaustion, and the days I pressed my ear to it, hoping the past would sound different if I listened long enough. But this time I closed the door without breaking, without shaking, without begging the memory behind it to stay. And the click of the latch sounded less like an ending, more like the clean, quiet beginning of someone new. Yeah, that simple motion felt like a blues man's prayer, like the note that finally resolves after years of trembling. I stood there with my hands still resting on the wood, feeling the warmth of all the versions of me who once hid behind it. And for the first time I felt gratitude instead of grief, because even the pain had shaped me, even the mistakes had softened something inside my chest. lights flickered overhead, like they were applauding the courage in my fingertips. And my shadow beside me was steady, unafraid, no longer leaning backward into the room where sorrow slept. Maybe we don't outgrow our past. Maybe we learn to fold it gently, placing it on a shelf inside the heart, where it can rest without ruling us. A chapter we don't reread, but never rip out. I turned away with shoulders that didn't feel like stone, my breath coming easier than I expected. And as I walked back toward the living room, soft amber light, I whispered into the quiet air, I didn't lose anything tonight. I simply let go. And somewhere behind that closed door, the echoes settled into silence. No longer chains, no longer anchors, just memories resting where they belong. I walk down the long, familiar street tonight, my footsteps echoing like old friends calling my name. And the wind moved around me with a kind of gentleness that only shows up when a man is finally ready to come home to himself. Every storefront I passed held a piece of who I used to be, the boy who thought strength meant never trembling, the man who mistook silence for control, the dreamer who forgot his dreams when the world grew too heavy. And yet somehow they all smiled at me as I walked by, like they'd been saving a seat at the table I abandoned. The street lamp flickered above me with a warm amber persistence, casting a shadow that didn't feel like an enemy anymore. And I realized my past wasn't stalking me, it was simply walking at its own pace behind me, patiently waiting me to start running. And with each block I crossed, it felt like a long walk back to the man I was becoming before life shook my ribs loose. So walk toward the version of myself who loved without fear, who dreamed without apology, who carried hope like a flame cup gently in his hands. Yeah, tonight I found that man again, and he welcomed me without a single question. I paused at the corner where we used to sit on summer nights, when the world seemed wide but not impossible, and the air smelled of warm pavement and small beginnings. And I felt something in my chest open like a window long painted shut as I turned towards home. The sky above deepened into a velvet blue, and the first few stars shone like truths I had forgotten, reminding me that healing isn't a miracle, it's a direction. One steady step after another, even when the road curves through memories you rather avoid. Maybe the man you're meant to be never disappears. Maybe he waits at crossroads and alleyways and quiet benches, holding the blueprint of your courage until you're brave enough to take it back. So I walk the last stretch with my chin lifted, feeling the weightlessness of a soul rediscovering its own rhythm, and whispered into the midnight air, I'm here now, I won't lose myself again. When I reached my doorstep, the world felt wider, my heart felt brighter, and the man I was becoming stood quietly beside me as if he had never left at all. The box was right where I left it, under the bed, covered in dust thick enough to hide whole years. And when I pulled it out, the cardboard exhaled like it had been waiting for me to finally be strong enough to open up the parts of myself I once refused to touch. Inside were letters I wrote on nights when loneliness felt like an endless hallway with no lights and too many echoes. Each envelope carrying handwriting that trembled with the weight of things I couldn't say aloud. The truths I folded tight like origami filled with regret. I sat on the floor with my back against the dresser, knees pulled close as if bracing for a storm from the past, and opened the first letter with fingers that shook, not because I was afraid of the words, but because I finally felt ready to honor them. The letters I never sent but finally read held versions of me I barely recognize. A man aching for answers, grasping for grace, writing his heartbreaking, long, uneven lines that tasted like midnight and sounded like surrender. And as I read each trembling truth, I felt the years loosen their grip around my ribs. One letter spoke of a love I couldn't save, no matter how tightly I wrapped my arms around it. Its words stained at the edges with a tear I must have pretended not to shed that night, a confession I wasn't brave enough to deliver back then. Another letter carried anger, raw, sharp, messy, ink pressed too hard into the paper like a wound. The kind of pain that happens when a man mistakes silence for strength and pride for protection, not knowing he's only building a prison for his own heart. Maybe those letters were never meant to be sent. Maybe they were love notes to the man I was becoming, breadcrumbs scattered through the darkest forests of my past, so I could one day find my way back with gentler eyes. Maybe healing is just learning how to read your own sorrow without flinching. When I reached the bottom of the box, I realized none of those words were unfinished. They were simply waiting for the day I'd have enough peace to understand them. And as I folded each letter close, I felt a strange gratitude for every lonely night that wrote them. I placed the box back under the bed, lighter now almost warm to the touch, and whispered into the quiet room, thank you for carrying the pieces of me. I wasn't ready to face until tonight.
There's a chair by the window with fabric faded by years of sunlight, one wooden arm polished smooth by the weight of my tired hand. And whenever the room grows quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat, I swear that chair remembers everything I've ever whispered into its cushion. I used to sit there on long winter nights, wrapped in a blanket that did little to warm my shaking bones, staring through the glass at a city that glittered like it was celebrating while I struggled just to breathe. The chair never asked why I stayed so late in the darkness. On nights when loneliness dripped from the ceiling like cold rain, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, letting the creak of the chair be the only reply I needed. A small gentle reminder that even if no one else showed up, something in this room was willing to hold me without judgment. That chair by the window heard everything, the whispered apologies I never sent, the trembling hopes I barely dared to speak, the nights I broke down and rebuilt myself in the same breath. And through every confession and every collapse, it stood steady beneath me like a quiet, faithful witness. I remember one evening when the sunset bled gold across the floor,
And I sat there holding a letter I was too afraid to open, feeling the chair cradle every ounce of fear, until the warmth from the window slowly reached my chest and gave me the courage to read what I had avoided for years. And on mornings when the world felt forgiving, I would sip coffee and let the steam fog up the glass, watching the street wake up with its endless footsteps and new beginnings, while the chair held me like it knew. I was learning how to start over in small, fragile steps. Maybe healing isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet places that carried us when we were too heavy for our own two hands. In chairs, in windows, in tiny rituals that stitched us back together, one soft, unseen thread at a time. Now when I sit there with a calmer heartbeat and a softer edge to my breath, the sunlight still lands on the armrest like it's blessing the space where I learn resilience. And the chair says nothing, as always, but its silence feels like gratitude. So I run my hand along the worn fabric, smile at the stories trapped in its seams, and whisper into the morning light, you held more of me than most people ever did. And I'll never forget that.
Midnight hung over the street like a velvet curtain, stitched with tiny silver threads of faraway stars. And as I turned the corner toward the place I once feared, I felt the kind of trembling a man gets when he realizes he's walking into a memory instead of running from it. This street used to feel like the edge of the world, every brick holding a secret I didn't want to remember, every doorway echoing with voices I tried to forget. And for years I avoided its shadow like a wounded animal, hiding from the scene of its own undoing. But tonight the pavement glowed softly under street lamps, like a path laid out by someone who believed in my return. And the wind moved between the buildings with the gentleness of a hand, guiding me forward, telling me the darkness here wasn't a threat anymore, just a chapter waiting to be closed. With each step I took through the place I once feared, I felt the past loosen its hold around my throat, the ghosts turning into silhouettes, the shadows shrinking back into simple corners. Yeah, I walked this midnight road
louder than the memories that used to swallow me whole. I stopped where I had once broken down, right beside the old iron fence, where a younger version of me fell apart in the cold, mourning things he didn't yet know how to let go of. Tonight I stood there tall, feeling the same wind pass through me without collapsing my ribs. A stray dog trotted by and glanced at me, as if to say, you've been gone a long time, before disappearing into the alley like it knew I didn't need company anymore. And for the first time I smiled, because the only companion I needed tonight was the man I've become. Maybe facing your past isn't about bravery, but about tenderness, the quiet kind that waits for you to grow strong enough to return to the places that shaped your scars, and thank them for the lessons they carved into your bones. So I place my hand on the cold fence, not to collapse against it this time, but to honor the boy who once stood here trembling. I made it, I whispered into the night, and you guided me farther than you ever knew. Then I walked back the way I came, the street behind me smaller, softer, no longer a battlefield, just a memory finally laid to rest under the gentle glow of midnight. Wipe the dust off an old blues record tonight, the one with edges worn thin from the day when I used to play it on repeat, just to feel something steady in a world that spun too fast for my young. Shaking hands when the needle touched down, crackle rose like a memory stretching its limbs, and the first guitar cry poured out of the speakers with a tenderness that hit me square in the chest, like it had been waiting years to welcome me home. That record knew my voice before I did, back when I didn't know how to speak my truth, when I swallowed my sorrow, 'cause I thought silence made me stronger, and let the bluesmen on that vinyl sing the words I couldn't yet pronounce. Tonight I heard myself in every note, in every lonely bend, every soft-spoken ache hiding behind the melody. And I realized those old grooves held a map of the man I would become, long before I understood understood the shape of my own longing. Yeah, that record carried my voice before my voice ever carried me. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair, letting the harmonica drift through the room, like a ghost of hope checking in on me. And every warm, trembling riff felt like a bridge between who I was and who I finally grew into. There was one moment, maybe in the second verse, where the singer's pain cracked just enough to let a sliver of light shine through. And I swear it felt like he reached across decades to place a hand on my shoulder and whisper, "You made it, son." Maybe that's what the blues is, a language for the bruised parts of a soul, a place where the hurting can rest without asking permission, a quiet room in the heart where music speaks for you until you learn how to speak for yourself. When the song faded into soft static, I gently lifted the needle, like I was touching an old friend's hand, and felt gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the record, for the man on the microphone, and for the younger me who found comfort in the music long before he understood why. I placed the vinyl back into its sleeve with a care I never gave it in my youth. Whispered thank you to the silent room, and realized that sometimes the things that held us together were listening to us long before we learned to listen back. The evening hung like lavender mist above the rooftops, soft and forgiving, kind of twilight that makes a man exhale without even realizing he was holding his breath. And as I turned down that quiet street, my footsteps finally eased into a rhythm that didn't sound like running anymore. For years I walked like someone being hunted by mistakes, by memories, by voices that whispered not enough. Letting fear strike the tempo of every mile I traveled, and wearing holes in my shoes faster than I could learn what peace truly meant. But tonight the pavement felt like an old friend, warm under the dimming sky, welcoming in its silence. And the trees swayed above me with a gentle approval. Their leaves brushing against each other, like they've been waiting to applaud this quieter version of me. found the courage to slow down, where the ghosts stopped nipping at my heels and simply faded into the dust behind me. Where I realized I didn't need to sprint just to feel worthy of another sunrise. Yet a night I learned that moving slowly is sometimes the bravest thing a man can do. I passed the old bakery on the corner, its windows glowing gold, like a memory from a kinder lifetime. And the smell of warm bread drifted through the door crack with the tenderness of a promise saying, you're safe here, even with your scars. A couple walked by holding hands, their voices rising and falling like a private melody. And instead of feeling hollow like I once did, I felt something soften inside. I found an old photograph tucked between two forgotten books. Its corners yellow, its surface cracked like dry earth. When I lifted it into the afternoon light, it hit me with a quiet force of truth. A version of myself staring back with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. In that picture, I was smiling in a way that didn't feel rehearsed or borrowed. A younger man with hope like a spark, pressed gently against his rib cage, ready to ignite the whole world if life just gave him the chance. Oh, but somewhere between then and now, I learned how to hide behind polished words and pleasant lies meant to keep the peace, letting the truth crumble in the corners of my chest, while pretending every crack was part of the design. But that photograph stayed honest even when I didn't. Its ink refusing to lie, its smile refusing to fade, his eyes refusing to forget the fire I used to carry. And as I stared at that warm piece of memory, I felt the man in the picture whisper, you can still come back to yourself. I traced the outline of my face with a trembling thumb, feeling a warmth of recognition spread through me, like a blues riff that starts soft but lands heavy in the heart, reminding you of everything you lost and everything you still have left to gain. I remember the day that picture was taken, sun high, laughter easy, a breeze lifting my shirt like it wanted to lift my soul too. And the world seemed wide enough for both my dreams and my doubts to walk in the same direction. Maybe photographs don't trap time, maybe they free it, letting the past knock gently at your door to remind you who you were before life taught you how to pretend. So I pinned the picture to my wall, right where the morning light hits first, so that the next time I forget who I am, I can look into those younger eyes and borrow a little of the courage I misplaced along the way. And as I step back to admire the memory, I whispered into the quiet room, I see you, and I'm learning to be you again. The photograph didn't answer, it didn't need to. Its honesty said enough.
The park was quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that leans softly against your ribcage and asks you if you're finally ready to listen to your own heartbeat again. And there it was, that old wooden bench waiting under the same crooked tree, like a friend who never stopped saving you a place. I walked toward it with slow, measured steps, the gravel crunching like old memories under my shoes. And for a moment I swear the bench looked older, not worn out, just wise, like it had been collecting every version of me that once sat on its weathered board. I ran my hand along the wood, tracing lines carved by time, by sunlight, by storms, and by the weight of a younger man who used to sit here trembling with the fear of losing everything he loved before he even had the chance to hold it properly. This pen waited through all my seasons, summer hopes, winter heartbreaks, autumn regrets, falling like leaves in my feet, spring mornings when I believed I could bloom again. It carried every silence, every tear, every fragile smile,
never once asked me to be anything but the man I was in that exact moment. I remember the night I slumped onto this bench with rainwater dripping down my head, soaking my clothes and sinking into my bones, thinking the storm outside was gentler than the one that was tearing through my chest. And then I remember the morning I watched the sun rise from this very seat, feeling the world fit inside my two open hands, believing for the first time in years that hope wasn't just a story people told themselves to get through the night. But maybe healing doesn't happen in new places. Maybe it happens where the pain once lived, in the familiar spaces strong enough to hold your sorrow without breaking, until you learn how to hold yourself again. So I sat down on that bench, older now, a little softer in the heart and steadier in the soul, and whispered into the twilight wind, I'm not the same man you last held, but I think you'd be proud of who I'm becoming. The leaves rustled overhead like a gentle applause, and I leaned back into the wood, letting that old friend cradle me once more, just as it did in every season of my life. I stood before the mirror tonight, thinking it would show me the ruin I carried inside. The tired eyes, the cracked voice, the kind of bruised spirit a man hides when he's been fighting battles no one else can see. But instead, it offered me something softer. My reflection looked back with a gentleness I didn't expect to find, as if the glass had been watching me fall apart and choosing out of mercy not to highlight the mess of it all, just the courage it took to keep standing. My hands trembled at my sides, hands that once knew how to hold love, and later learned how to hold grief with the same shaky devotion. Hands that have reached out in hope and pulled back in fear more times than I could count. But the mirror didn't judge my trembling hands, it simply showed them as they were, flawed, tired, still capable of carrying kindness. And in that quiet glass I saw a man who had walked through storms and somehow found enough strength to remain human on the other side. I traced the outline of my jaw, feeling the uneven texture of days when I forgot to take care of myself, and nights when survival was the only thing on my to-do list. Yet the man in the mirror didn't look disappointed, he looked patient. There were faint lines at the corners of my eyes, not from age but from learning. Learning to laugh again, learning to cry when I needed to, learning to speak my truth even when my voice cracked down the middle. Maybe the mirror isn't meant to reflect perfection. Maybe it reflects possibilities, showing us who we could become if we stop treating ourselves like the enemy we're trying to outrun. So I place my trembling hands on the sink, lean forward until my breath fogged the glass, and whispered, I forgive you for all the times you didn't know how to be brave. And I swear the reflection smiled back, not with lips, but with understanding. I turned off the bathroom light with a steadier hand than I'd had in years, carrying with me the quiet truth that the mirror had offered me, that I'm still here, still growing and still worth looking at gently. The door creaked as I pushed it open. A small sound, but it carried the weight of all the months I spent avoiding this room, a sanctuary turned battlefield, a place where echoes of old love once pressed against the walls like they were trying to stay alive. I stepped inside slowly, like a man returning to a wound he believed would reopen. But the air was still almost warm, as if the room had been practicing forgiveness in my absence, waiting for my heart to soften enough to meet it halfway. The curtains hung untouched, dusty but gentle, swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't quite feel. And for the first time I noticed the sunlight landing on the floorboards, not harsh, not accusing, just quietly welcoming. This was the room where my heart finally exhaled, where the tightness in my chest that I carried like a second spine began to loosen, where sorrow stopped shouting and became a whisper I could listen to without breaking. Yeah, in this room I realized healing had already begun, long before I had the courage to see it. Yeah. I brushed my fingers along the bookshelf,
from years of burning memories, and each book I touched felt less like a reminder of loss and more like a chapter of who I soon. The street felt cold beneath my shoes, but not the kind of cold that bites, the kind that wakes you, that reminds you you're still alive, that asks gently, are you ready to walk through what once held you down? I passed the old alley where my grief once crouched like a wounded animal, ready to pounce every time I step too close. Tonight it sat quiet, more shadow than threat, more memory than monster. Farther down was the cafe where heartbreak left me at a table with 2 untouched cups of coffee, one for me and one for a goodbye I wasn't ready to hear. Tonight the lights inside glowed like forgiveness instead of abandonment. I kept walking back through the memories I once believed would break me, the ones I carried like heavy stones in the pockets of my soul, the ones that whispered you won't survive this. But tonight each place softened under my footsteps, shrinking into something I could finally hold without shaking. I stopped at the old bridge where I once leaned over the railing, thinking the river below understood me better than anyone alive. Tonight the water looked calm, like it had been holding my secrets gently, waiting for the day I could reclaim them. On the corner near the abandoned bookstore, I remember the argument that cracked something in me I thought unfixable. And yet tonight the wind moved past the broken windows with a kind of tender indifference, as if even the ruins had chosen to move on. Maybe resilience isn't loud, maybe it's quiet, steady, measured in footsteps taken slowly through the places that once held your fear, until they become familiar roads instead of emotional battlegrounds. And when I reach the final block, the one I've avoided the longest, I noticed my hands weren't trembling, my breath wasn't shallow, my heart was steady, beating with the rhythm of a man who survived himself. I turned around and walked home, each step lighter, each memory smaller, each shadow surrendering to the night. And for the first time in far too many years, I felt proud of the man who kept walking.
I stood before the window, the same way a man stands before a confession. Quiet, trembling, full of truth. He's tried too long to swallow, and for a moment I just held the latch, as if opening it would let the whole world see the pieces I kept hidden. That window hadn't been opened in years, its frame stiff with dust, its glass cloudy with the breath of old seasons. I used to keep it shut tight, because I wasn't sure the world outside had room for the man I'd become, or the storms I carried inside my ribs. But tonight something shifted in me, something soft, something brave in the quietest way. So I pressed my thumb beneath the latch, feeling the metal tremble like it remembered how many times I had walked past without touching it. When I pushed that window open at last, the breeze came rushing in, like forgiveness pouring into a wound I'd forgotten how to heal. Cool, honest, unafraid of my broken pieces, and for the first time in years I took a breath so deep and clean that my heart felt brand new. The night air carried the scent of rain and the faraway sound of someone laughing, a reminder that life outside my walls kept moving even when I didn't. It crawled across my skin like sunlight trying to bloom in a place that had forgotten warmth. I leaned on the windowsill, hands shaking in a way that didn't scare me anymore, because trembling feels different when it's the beginning of healing instead of the echo of fear. And the stars above the rooftops look like tiny promises finally keeping themselves. Maybe windows don't open to the world, maybe they open to the parts of ourselves we locked away when life felt too sharp, too heavy. Maybe letting the air is just another way of letting ourselves out. The wind fluttered the curtains like applause meant only for me, and I closed my eyes as the cool night wrapped around me, like a lover who never lost patience. And in that moment I whispered, you're allowed to breathe now, you're allowed to begin. I left the window open as I walked away from it, letting the night fill the room with quiet courage, the kind that stays long after the darkness goes to sleep. There's a street lamp on the corner that once lit my lowest nights, a quiet guardian that kept me company when I couldn't tell the difference between despair and exhaustion. Tonight I walk back to it with footsteps steadier than I ever thought I'd own. The glow spilled down the pavement like golden water pooling at my feet, and for a moment I felt the old weight press against my chest. Not to suffocate me this time, but to remind me of how far I'd come. I stood under that street lamp, the way a man stands before an old friend he once leaned on too heavily, and the silence between us felt warm, like it held all the versions of me who had once broken here and kept walking anyway. That street lamp, remember me when I was lost, when my shadow shook like a frightened child, when my voice cracked under the pressure of pretending I was fine, when hope felt like a distant rumor and the night swallowed every truth I had. But tonight, this light felt different, less like rescue, more like recognition. I touched the cold metal of its pole, running my hand down its trembling surface, feeling the leftover heat from years of watching the lonely, the broken, the ones who couldn't sleep because their hearts were too loud. Cars passed by slowly, the headlights slicing through the dark with brief bursts of clarity, and each one reminded me how many nights I watched life move past from this very spot, wondering if I'd ever rejoin it. Maybe we owe gratitude to the places that held us when no one else knew how. The corners, the benches, the street lamps that kept shining. Even when we dim, maybe they remember us, not as failures, but as fighters. So I whispered into the soft halo of light, thank you for not giving up on me. And I swear the glow flickered, not from the wind, but from understanding. And as I stepped away, my shadow followed calmly, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. The lamp shrank behind me as I walk toward a brighter street. But its warmth stayed in my chest, guiding me like a memory. Finally here. The bridge stretched across the river tonight, like an old companion with arms wide open, its railings glimmering under moonlight, the same way they did in the years when I came here with thoughts too heavy for any man to hold alone. But this time, the weight in my chest felt light. I walked slowly toward the midpoint, where the water below hummed its endless blues, a gentle rhythm I used to mistake for a lullaby meant to drown my sorrow. Now it sounded like a promise, steady, patient, unwavering. There were nights this bridge knew me better than I knew myself, nights when my heartbeat stuttered like a broken drum, and my hands clutched the railing as if the metal was the only thing that could keep me from falling inward. Tonight, those same hands rested softly, unburdened. This was the bridge where my heavy thoughts learned to rest, where the wind carried away the fears I'd whisper into the darkness, where the river below held my secrets without judgment or demand. And tonight, standing under the quiet moon, I finally felt the peace I spent years searching for. I leaned forward just enough to see the ripples scatter like silver threads, stitching the city's reflection into something soft and whole. Once I believed the river swallowed pain. Now I know it only listened until I was strong enough to release it myself. A train passed by on the far tracks, its distant rumble a reminder that life keeps moving even when we pause at the edge of ourselves. I watch the light sweep across the sky, painting my shadow across the bridge like a blessing instead of a burden. Maybe healing doesn't mean forgetting. Maybe it means returning to the places that once cracked us open, and realizing the pieces have grown back in softer, stronger shapes than we ever imagined. I stayed there until the breeze cooled my face, lifting strands of hair and carrying my old fears downstream. And I whisper to the quiet water, I survived, and I'm learning how to live. Then I walked off the bridge with steady footsteps, leaving behind the weight that once threatened to break me, letting the night cradle it instead. Coat hung on the back of my closet like a relic of a life I barely recognize. His fabric worn thin at the elbows, his pockets filled with old receipts, and pieces of the man I was on the night I decided to choose myself over the way that was drowning me. Tonight I slipped my arms through its sleeves, feeling the familiar heaviness settle across my shoulders. Not the heaviness of sorrow, but the weight of all the courage stitched into its seams. The night I finally said, enough. Smelled faintly of cold air and the distant echo of rain, reminders of the storm I walked through when my heart shook like paper, but my legs carried me forward anyway, one trembling step at a time towards freedom I wasn't sure I deserved. This was a coat I wore the night I chose myself, the night the world felt too big and I felt too small, but still took the path toward survival and wearing it again. I felt the strength of that moment return. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. I remember standing under a street lamp, hands buried deep in these same pockets, trying to warm fingers stiff from holding on too tightly for too long. The lamp flickered like a nervous heartbeat, mine reflected in the glow. I walked through the old neighborhood tonight, coat hugging me like an old friend, who knows my darkest chapters and still chooses to stay. And I realize the fabric hasn't aged alone. I've grown into someone stronger than the man who first wore it. Maybe coats remember us better than mirrors. They carry the weight of our choices, the echo of our footsteps, the heat of our courage in ways we forget to honor. Maybe this coat knows my strength better than I ever did. Oh, I slid my hands back into the pockets and found a scrap of paper, a faint reminder of the life I left behind. I held it for a moment, felt the ache and let it go in the night breeze, watching it drift like a final goodbye. Then I pulled the coat tight around me, smiled into the cool evening air, and whispered, I'm proud of you for choosing to stay alive when it would have been easier not to. The night answered with silence, the good kind, the healing kind. There was a corner in that little cafe, the one where the walls were close enough to feel like a hug, and the light at the wooden table just right, like it wanted to paint honesty across anyone who sat there. Tonight I found myself drawn to it without knowing why. I ordered coffee I barely intended to drink, letting the warmth seep through the cup into fingers that hadn't felt grounded in days. Outside, the city murmured its endless rhythm, but in that quiet corner, everything softened into stillness. I sat down slowly, as if approaching a memory I wasn't sure was ready to be touched. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission in that quiet corner. I heard my own name again, like a forgotten melody finding its way back to my tongue. And in that moment I felt myself return. I looked at my reflection in the tiny window beside me, and instead of seeing exhaustion pressed into the lines around my eyes, I saw a softness I hadn't recognized since the days when hope was easy to carry. A child laughed somewhere near the door, and the sound washed over me with the sweetness of a memory I didn't know I missed. It reminded me of a time when my name meant possibility instead of pressure. Maybe we don't lose ourselves, maybe we just get buried under years of noise, fear, duty, longing, confusion. And maybe all it takes is the right quiet corner for our true voice to rise again, like dawn breaking inside our ribs. So I whispered my name into the warm steam of my untouched coffee, feeling it roll across my lips like something holy. And for the first time in far too many years, it didn't feel heavy, it felt like coming home. When I finally stood to leave, I placed my hand on the back of the chair and let gratitude fill my chest, because that quiet corner gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. The hallway was darker than I remember, this light bulb flickering like it was breathing in slow, uneven sighs. I'd avoided walking down it for months, too many memories folded into its narrow walls, too many shadows I wasn't ready to face without trembling. Tonight felt different. My footsteps echoed softly, the kind of echo that feels more like company than loneliness. And for a moment I paused, expecting the familiar rush of fear to tighten around my spine, but it didn't come. Instead I felt something strange, a sense that the shadows along the walls weren't waiting to swallow me, but to accompany me, like silent witnesses who had grown tired of scaring me. Yeah, this was the hallway where my shadows walked beside me, no longer dragging chains of regret, no longer whispering doubts into the corners of my mind. Tonight they move gently at my my pain, as if they'd learned I was no longer a man made of fear. Yeah. I touched the wall with the back of my hand, cool, familiar texture with time, and could almost feel the memories breathe beneath the pain. But instead of recoiling, I let my fingers trail peacefully over the stories embedded there. A faint light spilled from the room at the end, warm and golden, and I felt it draw me forward the way morning draws a tired soul out of its darkest night. With each step, the shadows grew softer, losing their sharpness, like old wounds finally healed. Maybe shadows aren't our enemy, maybe they're the pieces of ourselves we try too hard to outrun, waiting patiently in the dark for the day we grow brave enough to walk beside them without shame. When I reached the end of the hallway, the light wrapped around me like a promise I had earned. I looked back once, just once, and the shadows looked smaller, gentler, almost grateful. I turned off the flickering light, closed the door behind me, and whispered into the quiet, I'm not afraid of you anymore. The darkness didn't answer, it didn't have to. Its silence felt like peace. I sat on the middle step of the staircase tonight, the same one where I once folded myself into a shape small enough to hide the fear I couldn't name out loud. The wood creaked beneath me, not in protest, but like it recognized me after too long. The staircases held more of my weight than most people ever did, catching the collapses I didn't want anyone to see, holding me steady when my legs gave out under the truth I spent years avoiding. I ran my hand down the banister, feeling grooves carved by time and trembling fingers, and thought about all the nights I counted these steps like failures, each one a reminder of how far I had to climb before I could breathe normally again. But tonight I saw the staircase differently, not as a mountain I once feared, but as a quiet teacher that showed me healing isn't a leap, it's one careful, honest step at a time. Yeah, these old wooden steps held every version of me until I learned to stand tall again. I remember the night I sat on the bottom step crying quietly, trying to wipe my face before anyone noticed. And how the staircase didn't judge, it just held me, letting my sorrow settle like dust in its corners. And I remember the morning I climbed these same steps slowly, still aching, still unsure, but determined to see the sunlight waiting at the top landing. A small victory no one saw me. Maybe staircases are metaphors the world builds into our homes, reminding us that progress is measured in inches, in breath, in trembling hands, reaching for the next rise. I stood up tonight and climbed the staircase slowly, one step, then another, feeling my chest open as if each wooden board whispered a quiet encouragement beneath my feet. At the top, I turned back and smiled at the steps below, not because I conquered them, but because they carried me every time I couldn't carry myself.
I pulled an old jacket off the top shelf tonight, one I hadn't touched in years. Its fabric stiff from time, its pockets full of forgotten fragments from a version of me I wasn't sure I'd ever meet again. The moment I lifted it to my face, the scent of cold nights and worn decisions washed over me, the kind of smell that carries equal parts regret and gratitude, like the ghost of a memory whispering, remember who you were. I slipped it on slowly, feeling the weight of old dreams settle across my shoulders, dreams that once felt too big for the man wearing them, yet somehow still live in the seams and fabric. This jacket still smells like who I used to be, a little reckless, a little hopeful, a little lost, but glowing with belief that tomorrow could be kinder than wearing it again. I felt that younger version of me place a steady hand on my heart.
I checked the pockets, finding a folded bus ticket from a night I ran toward a future I didn't yet understand, and an old matchbook from a bar where I laughed louder than the pain I carried home afterward. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the jacket hug me like an old friend with warm arms, and realized I wasn't mourning the past, I was honoring it, feeling gratitude for every lesson stitched into the fabric. Maybe clothing remembers us in ways we forget, the warmth of our shoulders, the shape of our fears, the weight of our hopes. Maybe this jacket held on to the man I was, so I wouldn't lose him completely, yeah. I stood in front of the mirror, watching the man I've become, wear the jacket of the man I once was, and the reflection felt whole. Two timelines finally meeting, without shame or longing, just understanding. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I folded the jacket carefully, slid it back onto the shelf, and whispered a soft thank you into the quiet closet air. It didn't answer, but its memory stayed warm on my skin. The house was quiet in a way that made the night feel endless. A soft breathing darkness wrapped around every corner, and in that stillness I sat on the edge of my bed, with a heaviness I'd carried for years, finally ready to speak its truth. I placed my hand on my chest, feeling the slow, uneven rhythm of a heart that had survived storms and never got credit for enduring. Beat trembled beneath my palm, like it wasn't sure it deserved to be held so gently. I whispered into the dim room, I'm here. And for the first time I wasn't talking to the walls or to the memories or to the ghosts that lived inside my ribs. I was talking to the part of me I'd ignored the longest. That night I finally sat beside my own heart, not as a stranger, not as a critic, but as a companion who had walked every mile of pain with it. In that quiet moment, I felt it soften, felt it trust me, felt it let go. I Thought about all the times I pushed it past its limits, demanding strength when it had none left to give, blaming it for breaking when it was only trying to keep me alive. I apologize for the silences, for the years I didn't listen, for the nights I numbed its voice, for the mornings I expected it to rise without complaint. And under my hand the beat grew steady, as if forgiveness was already waiting inside it. Maybe hearts don't shatter from life itself, maybe they fracture from the weight of feeling unseen, even by the person they beat for every day. Maybe all they need is to be heard in the language of presence. So I sat there in the darkness, breathing slowly, letting my heart rest against my ribs, like a tired child leaning into someone safe. And I whispered, we're moving forward together now, no more running from each other. When I finally lay down, my pulse stayed calm, not because life grew easier, but because I finally learned how to sit beside myself with the same kindness I always offered others.